Zacchaeus, in his heart, senses a void, and something in his soul is speaking to him that the void that he has will never be filled by his wealth, never be filled by his power or his position. It will only be filled by this man, Jesus, whom he knows little or nothing about. So Zacchaeus, not only was he this type of person that was good at squeezing money from people, he was also good at squeezing money from his own people, which meant he was doubly harsh. He was doubly hard-hearted. Also, it meant he was doubly hated. This is the type of man that Zacchaeus was. So I don't know about you, but I grew up hearing those Sunday school stories about Zacchaeus and reading the children's illustrated Bibles with the pictures, the biblical pictures in there, the paintings and everything. And without fail, the picture of Zacchaeus was always presented as this adorable little short guy. Wasn't it just this cute little short guy that just had this lovable smile on his face? And he wanted to see Jesus, but just doggone it, he was just too short to see him. And there's this whole cute little climbing the tree episode, and bless his heart. I mean, just this. All he wants to do is see Jesus. He just wants to see Jesus. He's this adorable little short guy. If that too is your image of Zacchaeus, then let me encourage you to put that image to death tonight, because that was not Zacchaeus in any way, shape, or form. Zacchaeus was a nasty person. Zacchaeus was a harsh man. Zacchaeus was the type of man that would squeeze everything from you that he could. Zacchaeus was the type of man who would have no compassion, no empathy. He was the type of man that was out for himself and didn't care about others. He was willing to sacrifice his place among the Jewish community for wealth and position and power. And not only did he do this, but he did it successfully and he did it well. He was a nasty man. He was the type of man that you would not want to tangle with, because you would most likely come out on the losing end. He was a fighter. He was a winner. He was a taker. He was a stealer. This was his character. Now, in my mind, I like to associate things with modern day pictures of people. In my mind, I've just got a picture of the Godfather, Marlon Brando in The Godfather, right? That he's going to make you, if you travel along his road, Zacchaeus is going to make you an offer that you can't refuse. And this is the type of man that Jesus is seeking and seeking to save. The moral ugliness of the man would have been hideous to us had we known him. Had we been familiar with who he was, with his character, we probably would have been shocked to learn that Jesus sought for him. But not only is he the chief tax collector, we're also told that he was rich. So once again, there's another supporting statement to tell us, not only is this what he did for a living, he did it well. He was successful at taking from you everything he could possibly take from you. He was successful in dealing in very sharp and cunning ways with the Romans with whom he dealt with, as well as his own people whom he dealt with on a daily basis. This is the man that Jesus came to seek and to save. So Zacchaeus has a barrier between he and Jesus. Jesus is coming here to Jericho, and Zacchaeus, there's a barrier between he and Jesus. And the whole premise of the story is that Zacchaeus wants to see Jesus, but he can't. There's a couple of barriers, and one of the barriers between Zacchaeus and Jesus is the moral barrier of his love of money, of his wealth and his love of money. Ironically, Jesus just said in chapter 18, verse 24, he just made that statement at the end of the section of the rich young ruler. He just made the statement how hard it is for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And if we were reading straight through the Gospel of Luke, we would have noticed that just a couple of paragraphs later, here's a rich man seeking to enter the kingdom of heaven. So there's this barrier, this moral barrier of his wealth. We'll get to that a little bit later, but there's also the physical barrier. Because if we were reading through Luke's gospel in this way, we would also kind of notice this pattern. There's been 5 stories in a row. 5 stories in a row of someone who is seeking Jesus, but there is something preventing them from coming to Jesus. And the stories begin with the Pharisee and the tax collector and how they go out to pray. In that instance, one of them finds Jesus and one of them doesn't. The Pharisee, his pride, his moral pride is his barrier that keeps him from coming, from being known by his master. But then after that, we see the story of the children that want to come to Jesus. Now, the children can't come to Jesus because there's a barrier. What's the barrier? The barrier is the adults who say, no, Jesus is here for the adults. So you guys keep the children away. And then, of course, Jesus rebukes them about that, and he takes away the barrier. But then there's also the story of the rich young ruler. The rich young ruler seeks to come to Jesus, but he has a barrier too. His barrier is the same as Zacchaeus', which is his love of wealth, love of money. Jesus says, come and follow me, after giving everything away, but he cannot overcome his barrier. But then there's the story of of course, blind Bartimaeus. Blind Bartimaeus wants to follow Jesus, but his barrier is his blindness. He can't see. Jesus overcomes his barrier. So if we notice, there's these 5 stories of people seeking Jesus, seeking to follow Jesus, and there's something in the way. Now, when the thing that's in the way is an earthly thing, an external thing, like the age, the children, or the blindness of Bartimaeus, or the shortness of Zacchaeus. In each story, Jesus overcomes that. Jesus says to the people keeping the children away, no, let them come to me. He overcomes that barrier and they come to him. The story of blind Bartimaeus, his lack of sight prevents him from following Jesus. Jesus restores his sight and he follows Jesus. Now in the story of Zacchaeus, his shortness of stature prevents him from seeing Jesus, and Jesus overcomes that by making certain that there's a tree with a low-hanging limb right there in just the right place at just the right time. So Jesus overcomes these barriers for those who seek to come to him, except when the barrier is the barrier of sin, such as the Pharisee's barrier of his moral pride, or the rich young ruler's barrier of his love of money. They don't come to Jesus because their barrier is their own sin. So Jesus removes these other barriers, and Zacchaeus, in the story, as we know, is going to have his barrier removed. But as he is seeking to see Jesus, let's just remind ourselves once again of this man who is this open violator of the 8th commandment and the 10th commandment. He is not a secret sinner. He is an open violator of the 8th commandment, which says to not steal, the 10th commandment, which says to not covet the possessions of another. He doesn't violate these commandments in secret. He violates them openly. Everyone who knows him knows that he does what he does because of his love of money and his greed. And this open violator of the commandments, as we know, as the scriptures tell us, like when James tells us, violate one commandment, you've violated them all. But nevertheless, he openly violates at least these 2. But he was seeking, verse 3, he was seeking to see who Jesus was. Jesus' fame is at its apex. He is the most famous person in all of Israel. In fact, he is the most famous person in all of Israel since the time of Moses. One of the things that can get obscured for us as we read through the gospel accounts is we can sometimes have a hard time really grasping Jesus' popularity among the people for that 3-year period. We are told of the size of the crowds that come to Jesus, and the words that the gospel writers use to describe the crowds that come to Jesus. They should leave us with this understanding that Jesus was drawing crowds in the tens of thousands. At one point in Mark's gospel, Jesus says to his disciples to have a boat ready if he needs to escape the crowd. For he says, the crowd may crush me, and I might need to get on the boat for my own safety. The Son of Man, the eternal God, says, have a boat ready in case the crowd is going to crush me. So Jesus' fame has never been greater. His popularity has never been greater. His name is on the lips of everyone in Israel. And Zacchaeus is the most hated man in Jericho. His wealth, his love of money, his greed has caused him to be the most hated man in all of Israel, but he is wealthy. He is successful, he's powerful, and he's wealthy. But somehow, all of his possessions and all of his wealth and all of his power and all of his status and all of his accumulations, all these things have still left him lacking. And somehow, deep in his heart, he knows that. There's something within Zacchaeus that says to him, these things that I have chased and these things that I have received and these things that I've accomplished, they still are not fulfilling me. There's something within Zacchaeus that is pressing him, that's compelling him to say, this man, Jesus, I don't know what it is. I don't know who he is. I don't know what it is about him, but something about this man, Jesus, is compelling Zacchaeus that he must see him. Something about Jesus is drawing him to see Jesus or know something about Jesus. So Zacchaeus, in his heart, senses a void, and something in his soul is speaking to him that the void that he has will never be filled by his wealth, never be filled by his power or his position. It will only be filled by this man, Jesus, whom he knows little or nothing about. He was seeking to see who Jesus was. But of course, we remember this is the story not of the Zacchaeus who was seeking Jesus. This is the story of the Son of Man who came to seek and to save the lost. This is not the story of Zacchaeus seeking to see Jesus. This is the story of Zacchaeus who, because Jesus was seeking him, the Spirit had implanted within his soul a compulsion, a desire that he couldn't explain. He couldn't have put it in words, but it was there nonetheless. There was something about this man, Jesus, that he didn't even know what it was. Something was drawing him to Jesus. He was seeking to see who Jesus was. But on account of the crowd, he could not, because he was small in stature. Again, that's his barrier. Now, the irony of the whole story is, of course, as we're told, Zacchaeus is seeking to see him. It's really Jesus that's seeking him. But verse 4, so he ran on ahead. He ran on ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he, meaning Jesus, was about to pass by. So in this verse, we get this sense of Zacchaeus just throwing dignity into the wind, just forsaking dignity to, first of all, we're told, run to get to the tree in time to climb it to see Jesus. Well, in these days, Jewish men, one of the things that Jewish men just didn't do was run. It was considered undignified. It was considered beneath the dignity, not of a Jewish boy, but of a Jewish man. So once you entered manhood as a Jewish male, you just didn't run. That was not becoming of a Jewish man. Remember the story, once again, of the prodigal father? I like to call it the prodigal father because I think that's a more fitting description. But the prodigal father, when the son is coming home, remember how he grabs his robes and runs to his father. That's the picture of one just casting aside social mores and social expectations and say, whatever these people think of me, be damned, I'm running. So the picture there is this man Zacchaeus who runs. This act of running considered undignified. It was undignified because the culture of that day thought that, well, this was their thing. For a man to show his ankles was considered shameful. Odd for us to think of something like that, but that's how that culture thought of it. To show your ankles, if you're a man, was just not dignified. So that's why, even, in fact, the name, the word for the robe, you remember the long, you've seen the paintings and everything of the long flowing robe that would be worn, that would go all the way to cover the ankles. Even the word for that was the word that literally meant that which covers my shame. So it was considered undignified to run because your robe would come up and it'd show your ankles. Well, if that was undignified, then climbing a tree was certainly throwing all remaining dignity out the window. So the picture that we're shown here is of a man who is so compelled to see Jesus that he's willing to throw all of his respect and dignity out the window and run and climb this tree, which is an important reality for us to see, an important truth for us to see. Because that's the only way that the Son of Man seeks to save the lost. The Son of Man doesn't seek to save the dignified. In fact, You cannot come to the Son of Man and bring your dignity. Did you know that? You cannot come to the Son of Man and bring your dignity with you. There's only one way that He receives lost sinners, and that is lost sinners who are willing to discard whatever dignity they may cling to in order to cling to Him and Him alone. For Jesus would say that He didn't come for people that were healthy. He came for the sick people. He didn't come for the righteous. He came for those who were sinners and knew it. So this is a picture of what it looks like to be sought. For the Son of Man to seek means that when you are compelled by the Spirit to come to Him, you will do so in a way in which you will say, Jesus, will you take me, not me plus my dignity? I will not come to you clinging to some last measure of self-respect. I will come to you, seeing you as the pearl of great price, that which is worthy of selling everything else in my life to possess you. That's how Zacchaeus is brought to Him. Verse 5, and when Jesus came to the place, what a blessed word there, the place. Doesn't that remind you of all the anointed places in Scripture? All the anointed places where God did miraculous saving work in the Scriptures. Those anointed places like a well in Samaria, or a pool in Bethesda, or a seaside in Decapolis, or a house in Capernaum, or a hill outside of Jerusalem. When Jesus came to the place, He looked up and He said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. So in those words that Jesus speaks to Zacchaeus, we see the Son of Man seeking and saving that which is lost. Because these words are a revelation to Zacchaeus, and they're a revelation about who he is and who the Son of Man is and what his condition is and what this being saved will entail.